Lots of us have experienced sudden fear at some time in our lives. Sometimes you have a job where you experience fear a lot, such as in the army or maybe the police force. Most of us, though, get over the shock and the memory fades. But sometimes the fear is so overwhelming that the opposite happens. The memory is reinforced and becomes so overwhelming it almost takes over our mind. We have extreme anxiety, panic, we don't like going out, we have flashbacks and nightmares, and in its extreme form, it's called post-traumatic stress disorder. The task in treatment is to diminish the effect of these memories and allow us to cope better with the fear and anxiety that they induce. Research in the United States, though, is finding that maybe you could extinguish these memories altogether, and that these findings may be applicable to addiction as well. Here's Casey Barros.
Extinguishing memories completely and intentionally has previously been the stuff of science fiction, but that's exactly what studies at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore are actually achieving. The area of the brain where abnormal memories are cemented is called the amygdala.
And it's this area of the amygdala that actually is responsible for sort of dialing up the strength of other memories. So if you experience an emotionally powerful event in a particular environment, you're more likely to remember aspects of that context in which that event occurred. If it was frightening or painful or intensely rewarding.
You might be puzzled to hear of a link between the extreme fear and anxiety of post-traumatic stress disorder and addiction to, say, heroin or cigarettes. It's all about what triggers the abnormally intense fear of PTSD, or the feeling that you must have that drug fix or smoke. When it comes to post-traumatic stress disorder, the memory may be of the car accident that caused it. So when you're exposed to traffic, all of those fearful emotions come back. With addiction, it's not about fear, but an uncontrollable urge to take the drug, triggered by the sight of a packet of cigarettes or drug paraphernalia like a syringe.
And so stopping a drug actually is not the difficult part. It's resisting those reminders, actually, that is the difficult part. So this area of the brain called the amygdala can encode both incentive and aversive memories. So an incentive memory is a positive emotional response to a cue that predicts some sort of reward, such as food or sex, maybe it's even a drug. But fear memories are encoded in these same circuits, and what we think the amygdala actually is doing is creating physiological arousal in the presence of these stimuli. So drug addiction is itself a form of memory. What's happening in the brain is circuits that control reward-related behavior are being hijacked by drugs.
The research at Johns Hopkins has been learning from post-traumatic stress disorder in the hope of applying the findings to addiction.
What we think is happening during PTSD is a particular fear memory is being encoded, and this is resulting in sort of a maladaptive response to all sorts of stimuli that were present at the time of the trauma.
To follow this story, you need to realize that memories aren't stored in the nerves of the brain. They're actually stored in complex connections between brain cells, almost like a map. The dysfunctional memories of PTSD are abnormally locked into these connections, and that's the problem with current treatments, is that they don't actually unlock the connection, but rather help people to cope with it better. Psychologists use what's called exposure therapy, where a person is gradually exposed to their most fearful situation. So they might start with just the thought of a car, then move on to a photograph, and end up taking an actual journey. Exposure therapy does work, but it really only teaches a person to suppress the fear and anxiety. The challenge is to extinguish the memory altogether, and researchers did this in animals by repeating the exposure therapy at a much higher frequency than would normally occur, effectively flushing out the blocked connections, called synapses, between nerve cells.
is it possible to tweak a memory or to modify it after its formation? And if you want to sort of sculpt a new pathway in a network in the brain, previous research had shown that this particular receptor could be removed from synapses quite easily during certain kinds of synaptic stimulation. So we tried it, and by altering the timing of stimuli during extinction learning, it's actually possible to completely erase fear memory, so that when it's suppressed, it doesn't come back ever. So that's our hope, is that eventually this will lead to treatments for people with PTSD, and we think also other forms of conditioned behavior like drug addiction.